She changed the front door lock on my birthday and handed me a slice of cake on the porch like I was the neighbor. Name's Walter 62, retired contractor. Or at least I was until I found myself staring at my own house from the sidewalk keys still warm in my hand. Ever had everything look the same smell of lemon polish, hum of the fridge, but know none of it's yours anymore? Tell me, what would you do if home stopped letting you in? This isn't your house anymore. That's what Mallory said. And the worst part, I believed her for a second. There was no screaming, no grand gesture, just the rain ticking on the cedar planks, and her voice low, clipped, efficient. Like a line item on a to-do list she wanted to check off. The porch light overhead gave her a halo she didn't deserve. Dean stood behind her, arms folded, but not in defiance. No, it was the kind of cross-arm stance that said, "Please don't make this worse. My son, my only son, reduced to a bystander." I tried to catch his eye. He looked away. I didn't expect a hug, but maybe a flicker of doubt. Regret Ryder's little voice cut through the fog. "Grandpa, are you going away again?" I forced a smile, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. "Just for a bit, buddy. Be good for your mom, okay?" Mallory didn't say anything. She just moved slightly, making space between her and the doorframe, not to invite me in, but to clear my path out. And I walked. Not because I agreed, not because I had somewhere to be, but because staying would have meant begging. And I'd done enough of that in silence over the years. As I stepped off the porch, my foot caught the edge of the Home Sweet Home doormat. It used to be navy. Now it was mostly a sad gray sponge, soaked and sagging under my boot. The welcome had long faded. I didn't go far. Just started circling the house each step, dragging a memory behind it. The garden beds where Margaret planted her tomatoes. The chimes she hung that never stopped singing. The crack in the sidewalk where Dean tripped on his 3rd birthday and refused to cry. He just sat there, knees bloody, insisting he was a fixer like Dad. Rainwater clung to the tips of the rose bushes. They hadn't been pruned in a while. Maybe Mallory was too busy. Or maybe she didn't care. I paused near the window to the kitchen. Inside, I could see outlines the wine rack I built from reclaimed barnwood, the tile backsplash Margaret chose after 3 trips to Home Depot. The new faucet gleamed modern, stainless, clinical. Dean was pouring wine. Mallory typed on her phone. Neither looked up. The blinds hadn't been drawn. I stood there getting drenched, watching the life I had built brick by brick pass me by like I was a ghost. The shed was just around the corner, half swallowed by ivy. I hadn't been inside in weeks, maybe months. My hand found the latch, instinctively, fingers moving in muscle memory. It creaked open, resisting like an old friend holding a grudge. Inside, the air was thick with wood dust and stories. The workbench still had Margaret's teacup ring etched into the corner. The last time she came out here, she brought me lemon squares and sat on the stool, humming Patsy Cline. I sat down on that same stool. The cushion still had the faint dip of her weight. The keys were in my pocket. I hadn't let go of them, not even during the argument. My fingers played with them, now cold metal, still carrying the warmth of my body. Like they were refusing to forget their purpose. Through the small window, I saw the porch light flicker. Mallory emerged again, double-checking the lock. She ran her hand over the handle, pressed it, pulled it, then turned the deadbolt with an assertiveness that made something inside me clench, as if she were locking out a stranger, as if I'd never lived here, as if none of it had ever belonged to me. Dean didn't follow her. He didn't even glance out the window. And in that moment, something broke, not loudly, not theatrically, just quietly, like a thread coming loose from a sweater you didn't realize was unraveling. I looked around the shed. My old boots still sat by the door. The leather apron Margaret had embroidered with Walt the Wizard hung on the peg. I ran my hand along the workbench, felt the nicks, the grooves, the history. Then I closed my fist around the keys. Still mine, still solid. "Not yet," I whispered, voice cracking, with a kind of determination I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't ready to vanish. Not from my home, not from my name. Margaret once told me silence is the luxury we earned. She said it on a Tuesday years ago after a particularly long day of painting the guest room sage green. I didn't get it then. I do now. The silence left with her, When she passed in early 2010, the house didn't echo, it sighed. The corners felt wider, the air had too much space. I didn't cook for a month. Couldn't. The kitchen seemed to resent the absence of her cinnamon rolls and Sunday roast. But grief, I've learned, isn't loud. It settles in the grout, in the way the light lands on the empty side of the bed. Dean and Mallory offered to visit more. I told them not to. Then during a call where I didn't say much, and Mallory did most of the talking, I offered, "Why don't you two move in for a bit?" It felt generous. Margaret would have approved. She always said family needed proximity to survive. Within 2 weeks, they arrived with suitcases, an espresso machine, and a stack of self-help books taller than Ryder. The first few months were warm. Ryder's giggles filled the halls. Dean took on the lawn. Said it gave him peace. Mallory offered to cook. I let her. We shared lasagna in silence and smiled over cheap wine. But slowly, almost elegantly, the shifts began. First, it was the energy bill. I saw a new name on it, Mallory's. No mention. Just a subtle handoff. Then the thermostat got a smart upgrade installed on a Sunday while I was out at church. I came home and couldn't figure out how to raise the heat. Mallory gave me a 5-minute tutorial with the patience of a tech support rep. The old wind chimes Margaret loved disappeared one day. Mallory claimed they tangled too much. I didn't protest. I just walked to the shed and placed them in a box labeled seasonal. The locks changed after a storm. A contractor came to upgrade security. Mallory coordinated. Dean shrugged. I only found out when my key didn't work. Mallory handed me a new one shaped like brushed nickel and devoid of charm. Better this way, she said. I didn't argue. I just nodded, said something about needing to keep up with the times. But that night I went into the shed and found the old key Margaret's label still wrapped around it in fading ink. Front 96. More things changed, slowly, seamlessly. The birthday card I got from them said from our home to yours. I stared at that sentence for 5 full minutes. The bookshelf I built from reclaimed wood disappeared, replaced with a white IKEA frame cleaner lines, Mallory said. I found the old one behind the garage, splintered, slightly covered in leaves. One day in 2019, I walked into the kitchen, pulled open the laptop we shared, and typed in the password to our joint savings account. It didn't work. Tried again. Denied. Dean was on the porch cradling a beer. I joined him, asked casually, "Hey, you changed the bank login." He winced. Mallory thought it'd be easier to consolidate everything into one family dashboard. You know, budgeting and all that. I smiled, nodded, pretended it made sense. That night I stood in the study. The framed photo of Margaret in her apron once above the fireplace had been moved to the hallway, near the laundry room, less central, still visible. I took down the deed from the drawer, ran my finger across the ink. My name, Margaret's, engraved in bold black print. Not Dean's, not Mallory's, ours. I held it under the lamp like it was a map I couldn't read anymore. Curtis brewed coffee strong enough to sand down a fence post. He never used filters, claimed they dulled the bite. This morning it hit harder than anything Mallory ever said. He handed me a chipped red mug with a faded Go Giants logo and dropped into a chair that creaked like a confession. Drink it hot or it'll taste like regret. I took a sip and winced. Still tastes like regret. Good. You're awake now. The trailer smelled like motor oil, pine soap, and old decisions. Dog-eared blueprints were spread across the small table like a quilt of half-built dreams. A faded map of Lake Sonoma clung to the wall behind him, with thumbtacks and a stubborn sense of optimism. Curtis had built homes once, not anymore. Now he tinkered, advised, brewed tar-like coffee, and watched men like me walk into their own erasure. You look like someone who lost a war he didn't know he was fighting, he said. I might have. Curtis squinted. You still living with that son of yours and the decorator? She's not a decorator. No, she's efficient. Ah, the worst kind. I stared at the blueprint closest to me. It was dated 2004. Margaret and I had been planning a small guest house back then. Never built it. Life got in the way. She told me it wasn't my house anymore, I said. Curtis raised one eyebrow slowly. And you believed her. For a second, that's what scared me. He leaned back. Let me tell you how I lost my place. Not my house, my place. Curtis had 3 sons, only one still spoke to him. When his wife passed, he invited his youngest and family to move in just until they got on their feet. The rest was predictable. They started by changing the thermostat. Then came the pantry labels. Then, God help me, they told me not to fry bacon because it aggravated the toddler's lungs. My house, my skillet, my bacon, I chuckled. You're making this up. He held up 3 fingers like a Boy Scout. Word for word, last straw was when I walked into my garage and found my recliner, gone, replaced with a Peloton. Dear God, I took my boots and left. There was a long pause. Then his voice softened. They don't mean harm, Walt. They're not monsters. They just think they're doing what's best for everyone. And if you don't say no, they'll keep helping until there's nothing left of you to help. I stared down at the steaming mug. The table between us carried silent artifacts, a coffee ring, a bent nail, a flyer from a local real estate seminar. Behind the screen door, his old lab mix barked at a drifting leaf. He let the words settle, then added, They'll take the walls and leave you the wallpaper. I pulled out my phone and opened the Villa's Access app. I hadn't checked it since last week. The screen loaded slowly as if bracing me. Access revoked, admin override. No warning, no notification, just gone. My code, the one I'd set up years ago, the one tied to the garage, the shed, the thermostat, was erased. Mallory's name was listed as the primary contact. I didn't speak for a full minute. Just stared at the screen. Curtis noticed. Well, I'm not doing this again, I said more to the trailer walls than to him. Then don't. I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I never thought I'd call Paul Mendez. Property law. I tapped out a message, need consultation. Property access revoked. Advice needed soon. I hesitated before sending. Then pressed the button. Curtis grinned. Lawyers get a bad rap, but sometimes they're the only ones with a hammer. As I pocketed the phone, it buzzed again. Dean. I watched it ring. His voice played after the beep. Dad. What's going on? I didn't pick up. The lake outside shimmered under pale clouds. The screen door creaked in the breeze. Curtis hummed something bluesy, aimless. I built that house, I whispered. Every damn corner. Curtis nodded. Then maybe it's time to remind them who still has the blueprints. When Mallory left her laptop open on the kitchen island, I didn't snoop. I verified. There's a difference. One is emotional, the other evidentiary. I've been an auditor for over 3 decades. Trust me, I know the difference. The house was unusually quiet. Mallory had taken Ryder to a dentist appointment. Dean was at the office, or at least claimed to be. The spring light slid through the plantation shutters like fingers rifling through forgotten files. I stood there for a beat too long, the cursor blinking on a spreadsheet titled Villa Maintenance Trust. Q1 Review. Margaret's Trust. The one she'd started 10 years ago before the cancer came back. It was never large, just enough to cover annual repairs, a new water heater, maybe some landscaping. She'd called it her peace of mind pot. And now it was bleeding. Line by line I scrolled. PTA Gala Donation. $1,200. Sausalito Med Spa. $437.80. Le Creuset 7 Cute Dutch Oven. $380.95. Custom monogram towels. $168. Private Pilates sessions. 6. $540. It went on. Each entry tagged with cheerful comments, community goodwill, self-care, hosting essentials. All rationalized, all wrong. I didn't hear Dean enter. He'd stopped wearing shoes indoors, something Mallory had insisted on after her online feng shui course. You're home early, I said without turning. He hovered. Didn't expect to see you here. Likewise. His eyes darted to the screen. She's just organizing things better. The trust wasn't being used. She thought, she didn't think to ask. He shifted uncomfortably. It's not like she bought a yacht. I closed the laptop gently. It's not the scale, Dean. It's the erosion. He fell silent. I walked past him toward the hallway closet. The safe was still there, hidden behind a faux panel of Margaret's old wedding china. Same code as ever, 0402. Her birthday. It opened with a soft click. Inside lay a manila envelope sealed with tape yellowed at the edges. On it, Margaret's cursive, "In case the waters get muddy." I placed it on the table beside my leather folio. Dean watched like a man reading an obituary he wasn't ready for. "I didn't even know she wrote a will," he said. "You didn't ask." I unfolded the document. It named me primary trustee. No mention of Mallory. None of shared oversight. Just my name and Margaret's trust. I opened a drawer and pulled out a USB drive. Curtis had given it to me months ago, just in case you grow a spine, he'd said. I labeled it in block letters, Curtis, if I disappear. I copied the file's trust ledgers, invoices, the will. The silence returned, not peaceful but loaded. Dean cleared his throat. "You're not really going to start something legal, are you?" I looked at him, my son who once cried when he couldn't solve a jigsaw puzzle at age 5. My son who now stood here shrinking under truths too uncomfortable to claim. "I'm not starting anything," I said. "I'm protecting what's already mine." I returned to the laptop, found a folder labeled Rider School Art. Inside were scanned drawings, pirate ships, stick figures, a sun that looked suspiciously like a pizza, and one clearly done in crayon titled Grandpa's House. A crooked 2-story with my name above the door. I copied that too. As I zipped my folio shut, I noticed a sticky note curled at the edge of the monitor. PW Sunshine Can 2020. The irony made me smile. Margaret's password had been dignity. Simple, quiet, true. I walked toward the front door. Dean stood still, uncertain whether to follow to stop me or to disappear. I opened the door. "Where are you going?" he asked. I paused. To take back what's already mine. The pen didn't tremble. My fingers did slightly, but not the pen. That to me was the distinction. Anyone could mistake nerves for regret. But the line I signed clean, legal, final. Carol Benedict didn't offer congratulations. She wasn't that kind of lawyer. She clicked her Mont Blanc shut and pushed the last set of papers into a neutral gray folder, the kind that made even a personal apocalypse feel like routine documentation. "Well," she said, adjusting her glasses, "you're still 70% owner, and Margaret's half never legally transferred to Dean. They assumed you never objected. But on paper, Walter, it's still you." "I never let go," I said, not meaning to sound as bitter as I did. She nodded, not unkindly. "I've seen worse. At least you didn't sign it away over a Thanksgiving pie." I almost smiled. The office smelled faintly of coffee and dry toner. A framed diploma from UC Hastings hung askew behind her, and the receptionist hummed faintly outside off-key. Something from the 80s. In the blandness of that office with its clean angles and thin carpet, I felt more real than I had in years. "I want anonymity," I said. Carol looked up. "In the listings, in everything. I don't want Mallory or Dean interfering before it's done. I don't want Ryder caught in crossfire." She didn't question it, just made a note. The real estate contact was off-site, but Carol arranged it all, a quiet transfer to a neutral buyer. No signs on the lawn, no open houses. Escrow to start discreetly on Monday. Quick, painless, clean, as if surgically removing a memory. As she compiled the closing packet, she asked softly, "You sure you don't want to tell them in advance?" I met her gaze. "Mallory told me I don't live there anymore. I'm simply following orders." Her lips tightened, not quite a smile, not quite pity. Sometimes she said the only power left is in the quiet kind. She handed me the folder. Back at the villa, the late spring air smelled of jasmine and the slightest hint of chlorine from the neighbor's pool. It was too perfect a day to end a legacy, but that's what made it right. You leave when the paint's not chipped yet, when the carpet still smells like warm sun. No one was home. Mallory had taken Ryder to swim class. Dean, per usual, had vanished into the gentle fog of his job. I walked through the house slowly. The entry rug Margaret picked from a trip to Monterey still lay at an angle. The hallway mirror was a newer addition, Mallory's taste. I paused to straighten it, then didn't. In the kitchen, the light filtered in a golden hue I hadn't seen in years. On the table, a single cup of tea sat untouched, Margaret's china, her side of the table. Mallory must have used it without noticing. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the keys, still warm from my palm. House key, garage key, shed. Key. All still worked. I placed them on the table gently. Then from the inner pocket of my folder, I took out a small yellow sticky note. In simple block letters, I wrote, "You locked me out." I just left the door open behind me. I didn't underline, didn't sign it. I walked through the rest of the house once more. Past Ryder's crayon art on the fridge, the fading family photo that still held Margaret's smile in a sunbeam. Past the linen closet where we hid anniversary gifts. Past the fireplace we never quite learned to use right. In the foyer, I paused, hand on the door. Then a buzz in my pocket. I pulled out the phone. A text from the realtor, offer accepted. Escrow begins Monday. I slipped the phone back into my coat. No smile, no tears. Just a long breath that finally touched the bottom of my lungs. And then I stepped outside into the warmth, the keys behind me, and the silence ahead. I wasn't there when they found the letter, but I can picture it, Mallory's acrylics tearing open the envelope, her lips pressed in that habitual sneer she thought looked poised. First came rage, then disbelief, then the frantic call to Dean. That part I didn't have to imagine. I had the voicemail. Curtis's old tea kettle hissed from the stovetop. It always overboiled by exactly 2 seconds before he killed the flame with a swift wrist and a mutter. He never owned a microwave. "You want chamomile or that garbage Earl Grey?" He barked from behind the faded curtain. "Doesn't matter," I said, staring at the red icon blinking on my phone. 3 new voicemails. I tapped play. "This is illegal, Walter. You can't just sell What About Ryder? What about the family dinners we hosted there, you selfish small?" I tapped it off. My thumb lingered on the screen, not because I cared what came next, but because for once I had nothing to defend. No guilt, no hesitation, just space. Curtis ambled over, setting down a chipped mug. "Told you," he said, nodding toward the phone. The first sound you hear when power changes hands, screaming. Outside the trailer, a pair of squirrels chased each other across the edge of the lake, their claws clicking against the tin gutter. The birdhouse Curtis had been fixing sat open on his lap, half-nailed cedar fragrant. "So what now?" he asked. I shrugged. "Dean's probably on his way. He hasn't left a message yet, just 2 missed calls." He smirked. "Good, that means he's confused. Confused means he's still your son. Screaming means he's hers." 10 minutes later, Dean's silver sedan kicked up dust as it pulled into the gravel drive. He didn't slam the door, but he didn't close it gently either. The middle ground a small mercy. He didn't look at Curtis, just walked straight to me, hands open. "You really did it?" he asked. I nodded. "Without telling us?" "Without talking to Mallory." I raised an eyebrow. "Right," he added, deflating. "She told you to get out." He sat on the broken lawn chair across from me, rubbing his hands. Curtis poured him tea without asking. I reached into my folder, handed Dean a copy of the escrow email from Carol. Her phrasing was as sterile as always, escrow initiated. Parties notified. Final walkthrough pending. Dean's eyes scanned the page. "So it's done." "No," I said quietly. "It's beginning." He looked up. "What happens now?" I leaned back, feeling the plastic chair creak under my weight. "Now you live like I used to, in someone else's space. Only this time that someone isn't me." Dean didn't answer. He just stared down at his cup, untouched. Curtis kept hammering each tap on the birdhouse, rhythmic measured. "Funny," he muttered, not looking up. "How folks think love means permission. It doesn't. It means knowing when not to ask." Dean stood up. "I need to talk to Mallory." "You do that," I said, already turning back toward the lake. When the car pulled away, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Mallory or Dean. An email from Mrs. Smith, one of Margaret's old book club friends. Subject: Memory Builders Workshop. "We'd love your stories." Walter, it read. "We're gathering stories from the community about family homes, legacy, and letting go. Margaret once said you built that house with your hands. Will you share what that taught you?" I stared at the screen for a while. The tea kettle began hissing again, slow at first, then urgent. Curtis didn't move, just kept sanding the roof of the birdhouse, his hands calm, precise. The porch creaked beneath my feet. I didn't reply to the email yet, but for the first time in a long time, I opened a new draft. The room smelled like glue sticks, old pencils, and something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the loud kind, but the quiet, careful kind that builds up. Builds from the fingertips up. I hadn't held a hammer in a long time. The weight felt foreign in my palm at first, until it didn't, Mrs. Smith clapped her hands once. All right, everyone, this is Walter. He's going to walk us through framing a basic garden box today. No pressure, no grades. Just learn, make mistakes, and try not to hammer your thumbs. 3 teens looked up from their seats like they'd just been told they had to eat plain toast for dinner. Tyrell, Jenny, and Alex. Names I wouldn't remember yet, but soon would. Alex wore headphones around his neck. Jenny scribbled absently in the corner of her workbook. Tyrell looked at me like I was a substitute teacher he planned to ignore. I pulled up the first blueprint and laid it on the table. It was faded and folded at the corners, one of the last things Margaret laminated before she passed. A simple 4x6 frame, nothing complicated, just wood nails and trust. Okay, I said. First rule, wood doesn't lie. It's always the humans that fudge the measurements. That earned me a half smile from Jenny. I handed out tape measures. Your job is to cut 4 equal sides. If they're uneven, it'll wobble. If they're perfect, well, don't get cocky. We're aiming for functional, not perfect. As they got to work, I stepped aside and rubbed the paint stain on my flannel sleeve, bright orange from a project in '99 that never got finished. Margaret always said a man's flannel tells his history better than his resume. She was usually right. Half an hour and Tyrell mismeasured by a full inch. He swore under his breath, ready to toss the whole board. Keep it, I said. Mark it. Next time, cut against that line. He raised an eyebrow. You're not going to fix it for me, nope. Because then you wouldn't learn anything. Wood's forgiving if you treat it with patience. He shrugged but didn't argue. Small victories. That's when Mrs. Smith returned carrying a cardboard box that looked like it had survived 3 moves in a flood. Delivery came for you, she said. Inside was a tool set, clean polished. Sitting right on top, an old hammer with a worn, wooden handle. My initials burned into the grip, WH, 1992. Curtis's handwriting still carved sharp after all these years. I didn't need to read a note to know who sent it. Holding that hammer again was like shaking hands with an old friend you forgot you missed. My fingers wrapped around the groove's familiar calluses, returning like ghosts. One of the students, Alex, looked up from his project. Is that yours? Used to be, I said. Now it's yours. Well, y'all's. A pause, then Jenny asked, Did you build your own house? I looked down at the hammer, then out the smudged window. I thought I did, I said quietly. They didn't ask what I meant. Maybe they understood. Or maybe teenagers just know when to leave silence alone. The rest of the afternoon passed like warm clay, malleable, gentle, simple. We built 3 crooked frames and laughed at all of them. Alex measured twice and still cut wrong. Tyrell figured out how to brace a corner without nails. Jenny quietly aligned each board like she was solving a puzzle. When the final bell rang, Mrs. Smith stayed behind while I wiped down the tables. We're applying for a grant, she said. If it comes through, we'd like you to run the next season. I turned to her, half grin ready. Next season? These kids learn better when the room smells like cedar and sawdust instead of disinfectant, she said. And you? You build things slow enough for them to catch up. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked down at the hammer still sitting where I left it. Paint speckled, handle worn, but whole. That night, I laid it next to my bed right where a man used to keep a wedding photo or a Bible. Some tools don't fix things. They remind you of what's worth rebuilding. My new place is small, just big enough for my tools, a coffee pot, and the kind of silence I like. There's no buzz of a refrigerator motor I don't recognize. No footsteps that aren't mine. Just the occasional creak of the pine floors and the distant call of loons over the lake. Margaret would have called it peaceful. I just call it right. I never rebuilt the old villa. I rebuilt the man who built it. Mornings start early, not because I have to, because I want to. A strong cup of coffee, a sharpened pencil, a blog post drafted with fingers that no longer shake when they touch keys or memory. Footings and foundations, I named it. Nothing fancy, but people read, they comment. Some even come by the cabin to talk shop or pain. Dean visited last week, brought Ryder, no apologies, no speeches, just a model airplane kit and a cooler full of sandwiches. We didn't talk about the villa. We didn't have to. Ryder and I sat on the porch gluing tiny plastic wings together. He asked if I'd ever built something real. I nodded toward the shed. "That's my real house," I said, and he laughed. Before they left, I handed him a small wooden toolbox, unfinished pine, just his size. His name carved under the handle, Ryder H. He held it like it was made of gold. Later that week, I got an envelope in the mail, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a photograph, a kid standing proudly next to a crooked bookshelf. The handwriting read, "Built it myself. Thanks, Mr. H." There was sawdust on the Polaroid. I pinned it above the desk next to an old blueprint of the villa. The cabin has no television. I don't miss it. Evenings are for handwritten letters, sanding old wood, or hosting the occasional workshop for folks who don't mind driving 20 miles for quiet advice. Mrs. Smith drops off flyers every so often. Memory Builders Fall Cohort, or Fix It Fridays. They get tucked under magnets shaped like hammers and coffee mugs. One Saturday, a woman my age lingered after class. Said her husband passed away. Said she found solace in the blog post about square frames and crooked grief. I didn't say much, just nodded, handed her a pencil with my initials, and pointed her toward a workbench. Dean emails me sometimes now, short notes. Once he sent a photo of Ryder fixing a birdhouse. Another time, a question about power drills. The tone is different, not guilt, not apology, just reaching. I let some of them reach me now. The villa sold quickly. Word is the new owners gutted the kitchen. I thought I'd care. I didn't. Places hold meaning only when you let them. And I'd let go. Curtis still sends me jokes via email, usually bad ones. Last week he sent a photo of a freshly painted fence with the subject line, "Not too old to cover cracks." I printed it and taped it above the sink. Margaret would have laughed. Some nights I light a fire out back, sit with a blanket and sip something warm. Think about how long it took me to realize the difference between building something and owning it. I never truly owned the villa, not in the way people think ownership works. I paid for it, designed it, but its spirit. That drifted the moment I let silence settle between me and Dean. The moment I mistook retreat for peace. Now peace is something I work at. Like planing rough timber. It takes passes, time. Sometimes I hear footsteps on the gravel path outside, students coming by to return a tool or just say hello. I tell them to take what they need. Just put it back better than they found it. One day maybe someone will ask what I built after I sold my house. I'll say a workshop, a blog, a community, and maybe myself too, because in the end the foundation wasn't concrete or cedar. It was the choice to start over, to forgive the blueprint, to build again. And in this quiet, in this space that fits me just right, I finally feel at home. The lake was still that morning, its surface smooth as the worn handle of my old toolbox. The cabin smelled faintly of sawdust and cinnamon from a neighbor's pie cooling on the sill. In that moment, I realized I never needed the house. I just needed a place where I could matter again. Sometimes losing control is how you gain clarity, and sometimes walking away is the most courageous way to come home to yourself. If you're navigating lost silence or a door that's closed too long, know that you can build again. Maybe smaller, maybe slower, but stronger. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? Share your story or join the quiet ones, already building something new here. Hoi ChatGPT.